Welcome to Mystery at 221B, where Sherlock Holmes' secrets come to life.
In the shadowed halls of Ashbourne Manor, a brilliant historian vanishes, leaving only a blood-stained dagger and a cryptic cipher. Was it murder, betrayal, or a mastermind's ruse? As secrets unravel and suspicion poisons the air, only Sherlock Holmes, the meticulous Belgian detective, can pierce the veil of lies. Who holds the key to a lost Templar treasure? And what truth lurks in the manor's hidden passages? Dive into The Vanishing Historian, a mystery where every clue counts and no one is what they seem. Chapter 1. The Quiet Before the Storm. In the waning days of autumn, when the leaves of Berkshire turned to hues of amber and crimson, the grand estate of Ashbourne Manor stood as a sentinel of timeless elegance. Nestled amidst rolling hills and bordered by a silvery brook, the manor was a relic of Georgian splendor, its ivy-clad walls whispering tales of bygone eras. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke, and the sky above was a canvas of grey, promising rain. It was here, in this seemingly tranquil setting, that a drama of the most sinister kind was about to unfold. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the faithful chronicler, found himself invited to Ashbourne Manor by an old acquaintance, Sir Reginald Ashbourne, a baronet of considerable wealth and scholarly repute. Sir Reginald, a historian of some renown, had recently acquired a collection of rare manuscripts, and he wished to share his findings with a select group of friends and colleagues. Hastings, whose curiosity for intellectual gatherings was only matched by his penchant for adventure, accepted the invitation with alacrity. The manor's drawing room, where the guests assembled on that fateful evening, was a study in opulence. Polished mahogany gleamed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, and the walls were adorned with portraits of stern-faced Ashbournes, their eyes seeming to follow every movement. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. The guests, an eclectic assembly of scholars, aristocrats, and a solitary artist, mingled with polite restraint, their conversations a tapestry of erudition and veiled rivalry. At the center of this gathering stood Sir Reginald, a man of 60, with a lean frame and a face etched with lines of intellectual rigor. His eyes, sharp and discerning, betrayed a mind that seldom rested. Beside him was his niece, Miss Clara Ashbourne, a young woman of striking beauty and quiet reserve. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her emerald gown shimmered in the firelight. She moved among the guests with the grace of a hostess, though Hastings noted a certain tension in her smile, as if she carried a private burden. Among the other guests were Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, a formidable classicist with a reputation for ruthless ambition, Mr. Lionel Grayson, a jovial antiquarian whose booming laugh belied a shrewd mind, and Mr. Victor Crane, a reclusive painter whose brooding demeanor contrasted sharply with the room's conviviality. Rounding out the party was Mr. Thomas Reed, Sir Reginald's solicitor, a man of meticulous habits and a perpetually furrowed brow. The evening proceeded with the usual pleasantries, a sumptuous dinner of roasted pheasant and claret, followed by a lecture from Sir Reginald on his latest acquisition, a set of medieval manuscripts purportedly linked to a lost Templar treasure. The guests listened with varying degrees of interest, though Hastings observed that Dr. Mortimer's eyes gleamed with something akin to avarice, while Mr. Crane's expression remained inscrutable. As the clock struck 10, Sir Reginald excused himself to retrieve a particular manuscript from his study, promising to return shortly with a revelation that would astonish the learned world. The guests lingered in the drawing-room, their conversations growing desultory. Hastings, ever observant, noted the subtle undercurrents of tension, a sharp glance between Mrs. Langley and Mr. Grayson, a nervous fidgeting from Mr. Reed, and Miss Clara's repeated glances toward the door through which her uncle had vanished. Minutes stretched into an hour, and Sir Reginald did not return. The guests, at first merely restless, began to exchange uneasy looks. Miss Clara, her composure fraying, rose and announced her intention to check on her uncle. Hastings, sensing an opportunity to be of use, offered to accompany her. Together they ascended the grand staircase to the second floor, where Sir Reginald's study lay at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. The study door was ajar, and a faint draught carried the scent of old parchment and wax. Miss Clara pushed the door open, revealing a scene of quiet disarray. Books and papers were strewn across the desk, and a single candle flickered, casting eerie shadows. But Sir Reginald was nowhere to be seen. The window, overlooking the darkened gardens, was shut tight, and the room bore no signs of a struggle, save for one peculiar detail. A small, ornate dagger, its blade stained with a dark substance, lay abandoned on the desk. Miss Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Uncle!" she cried, her voice trembling. Hastings, his military instincts kicking in, examined the room with care. The dagger, he noted, was not one of Sir Reginald's usual possessions. Its intricate hilt suggested an artifact of historical significance. The dark stain, upon closer inspection, appeared to be blood, though not enough to suggest a fatal wound. The manuscripts Sir Reginald had promised to show were missing, and the safe in the corner of the room stood open, its contents rifled. "This is most irregular," Hastings murmured, his mind racing. He turned to Miss Clara, whose face was pale but resolute. Nodded, her eyes wide with fear but tempered by determination. They returned to the drawing room, where the guests received the news with a mixture of shock and suspicion. Dr. Mortimer demanded to see the study at once, while Mr. Grayson suggested calling the local constable. Mrs. Langley, her voice quavering, remarked that Sir Reginald had been far too reckless with his treasures. Mr. Crane, silent until now, merely stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. As the guests debated what to do, Hastings found himself wishing for the presence of his old friend, Sherlock Holmes. The little Belgian detective, with his fastidious habits and unparalleled intellect, would surely make sense of this perplexing scene. Fortunately, fate, or perhaps Sir Reginald's foresight, had already set the wheels in motion. Earlier that day, Sir Reginald had sent a telegram to Sherlock Holmes, inviting him to Ashbourne Manor to examine the manuscripts. The detective was due to arrive the following morning. The night passed in a state of uneasy vigil. The guests retired to their rooms, though few slept. Hastings, stationed in the drawing room, kept watch over the staircase, his mind turning over the details of the evening. The dagger, the missing manuscripts, the open safe, all pointed to a crime of deliberate intent. But where was Sir Reginald? Had he been taken, or had he fled? And if the latter, why leave behind such a damning clue? As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the manor's grounds, a carriage rattled up the drive. From it emerged a small, immaculate figure, clad in a perfectly tailored coat and gleaming patent leather shoes. His mustache was waxed to perfection, and his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, surveyed the scene with calm authority. Sherlock Holmes had arrived. "Mon ami Hastings," he said, stepping into the hall with a faint smile. "It seems you have stumbled upon a little mystery. Tell me everything, and omit not the smallest detail." Hastings, relieved beyond measure, began to recount the events of the previous night. As he spoke, Sherlock Holmes listened with rapt attention, his fingers steepled and his eyes half closed, as if already piecing together the puzzle. The stage was set, and the great detective was ready to unravel the enigma of the vanishing historian. Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Crime. The morning sun struggled to pierce the heavy clouds that hung over Ashbourne Manor, casting a pallid light through the tall windows of the drawing room.
The air was thick with unease, as though the very walls of the grand estate sensed the gravity of the situation. The guests, summoned by Miss Clara Ashbourne at the behest of Captain Hastings, gathered in a semicircle, their faces a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. The news of Sir Reginald's disappearance had spread like wildfire, and the discovery of the blood-stained dagger in his study had ignited whispers of foul.
An air of serene authority surveyed the assembled company. His small, neat figure seemed almost incongruous amidst the grandeur of the room, yet his presence commanded attention. His eyes, sharp and penetrating, moved from face to face, as if reading the secrets etched in their expressions. Captain Hastings stood at his side, notebook in hand, ready to record every detail of the investigation that was about to unfold. "Mesdames et messieurs," Sherlock Holmes began, his voice soft but carrying the weight of absolute confidence. "A most unfortunate event has occurred. Sir Reginald Ashbourne, our esteemed host, has vanished, and the circumstances suggest a crime of considerable cunning. I require your cooperation, and I assure you, the truth will be uncovered through the application of order and method." A murmur rippled through the group. Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, her lips pursed, adjusted her spectacles and leaned forward. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, are you suggesting that one of us is responsible for Sir Reginald's disappearance? That is a grave accusation." Sherlock Holmes raised a hand, his gesture both placating and commanding. "I accuse no one, Dr. Mortimer. I observe, I deduce, and I seek the truth. But let us be clear. No one shall leave this manor until my inquiries are complete. Now, I must see the scene of this irregularity." Hastings led Sherlock Holmes and Miss Clara to the study, the other guests trailing behind, their curiosity outweighing their trepidation. The study remained as it had been the previous night, save for the addition of a faint morning light that illuminated the disarray. The blood-stained dagger still lay upon the desk, its presence a silent accusation. The open safe, its contents plundered, gaped like a wound in the wall. Sherlock Holmes moved with deliberate precision, his gloved hands hovering over objects without touching them, his eyes darting from the desk to the window, from the floor to the ceiling. "Curieux," he murmured, bending to examine the dagger. "This blood, it is dry, but not so old as to suggest a prolonged interval since its application. And the quantity is insufficient for a fatal wound. Hastings, note the position of the dagger. It lies at an angle, as if placed with care, not dropped in haste." Hastings scribbled diligently, his admiration for Sherlock Holmes's method undimmed by years of companionship. "Do you think Sir Reginald was attacked, Sherlock Holmes?" Sherlock Holmes's moustache twitched, a sign of his amusement at the question's simplicity. "An attack?"
Gone. It is because someone has taken him, or worse. Those manuscripts, they were his life's obsession. Could they be the reason? Sherlock Holmes turned to her, his expression softening. "Mademoiselle, your concern does you credit. The manuscripts, yes, they are significant. Tell me, what did they contain?" Miss Clara hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Uncle spoke of them as a key to a Templar treasure, a cipher hidden in the text that could lead to untold wealth. He was to reveal their secrets last night, but he never returned." Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. A cipher, you say? Most intriguing. And who among the guests knew of this treasure? All of them, Miss Clara admitted. Uncle was not discreet. He believed the discovery would cement his legacy. Sherlock Holmes nodded, his mind already racing through possibilities. He turned to the safe, examining its lock with a magnifying glass. No signs of force, he noted. The safe was opened by someone who knew the combination, or by Sir Reginald himself. Tell me, mademoiselle, who else had access to this safe? Only Uncle, Miss Clara replied. He was meticulous about its security. Sherlock Holmes straightened, his gaze sweeping the room once more. Then we must consider all possibilities. Let us return to the drawing room. I wish to speak with each guest in turn. The interviews began with a methodical precision that was quintessentially Sherlock Holmes. Each guest was summoned to the library, where Sherlock Holmes sat at a small table, his notebook open and his demeanor calm but unrelenting. Hastings, stationed by the window, observed the proceedings with a mixture of awe and anticipation. First was Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, whose sharp intellect and brusque manner made her a formidable presence. She admitted to a professional rivalry with Sir Reginald, particularly over the manuscripts, which she believed could rewrite historical narratives. I was in the drawing room all evening, she declared, her tone defiant. Ask anyone. I had no reason to harm Sir Reginald. His discovery would have benefited us all. Mr. Lionel Grayson followed, his jovial facade slipping under Sherlock Holmes's scrutiny. He confessed to financial troubles, hinting that a share of the Templar treasure would have alleviated his debts. But I was with Mrs. Langley when Sir Reginald left, he insisted. We were discussing her latest art acquisition.
Offered no further details. Finally, Mr. Thomas Reed, the solicitor, fidgeted nervously throughout his interview. He admitted to handling Sir Reginald's financial affairs and knowing the combination to the safe, though he swore he had not touched it. I was in the billiard room with Mr. Grayson earlier, he said, but I retired to my room before 10. Sherlock Holmes listened to each account with unwavering attention, his questions probing yet polite. He asked about movements, conversations, and observations, noting every detail in his meticulous way. By the time the interviews concluded, the morning had given way to noon, and the manor seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the detective's next move. As the guests dispersed, Sherlock Holmes drew Hastings aside. Mon ami, the alibis are too neat, too convenient. Each guest has a motive, greed, envy, resentment, and yet none can be placed definitively at the scene. The dagger, the safe, the manuscripts, they are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture is not yet clear. Hastings frowned. Do you think Sir Reginald is still alive, Sherlock Holmes? Sherlock Holmes' eyes narrowed. That, Hastings, is the question. The blood suggests injury, but the absence of a body suggests something else entirely. We must search the manor, every room, every corner, and we must watch our suspects closely, for one among them knows more than they admit. As they prepared to begin their search, a sudden cry echoed from the hall. Miss Clara rushed in, her face ashen. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the gardener has found something in the shrubbery.
A piece of my uncle's coat, torn and stained with blood." Sherlock Holmes's expression remained impassive, but his eyes gleamed with renewed purpose. "Lead me to it, mademoiselle. The game, as they say, is afoot." Chapter 3. The Arrival of the Master. The discovery of the torn fragment of Sir Reginald Ashburn's coat sent a fresh wave of unease through Ashburn Manor. The guests, already shaken by the events of the previous night, gathered in the hall as Miss Clara led Sherlock Holmes, Captain Hastings, and a small retinue to the garden, where the gardener, a grizzled man named Jenkins, stood clutching the tattered cloth. The air was damp with the threat of rain, and the wind rustled through the manicured hedges, lending an eerie whisper to the scene. The shrubbery, a dense tangle of rhododendrons and laurels, bordered the manor's south lawn, not far from the study window. Jenkins pointed to a spot where the earth was disturbed, the soil churned as if by hurried footsteps. The fragment of cloth, a fine woolen material, dyed a deep
narrowing as he examined the ground. "The soil is soft, yes, but these marks are shallow, not the deep gouges one would expect from a struggle. And the cloth, it is torn, but the tear is clean, almost deliberate." Hastings, note the position, precisely 10 paces from the study window. Hastings scribbled in his notebook, his brow furrowed. "Do you think Sir Reginald was dragged out here, Sherlock Holmes? Or perhaps he fled and caught his coat on the branches?" Sherlock Holmes rose, brushing a speck of dirt from his immaculate trousers. "Fled? No, mon ami. Sir Reginald was not a man to flee. And dragged? There are no signs of a body being pulled, no flattened grass, no broken twigs beyond this small disturbance. No, this cloth was placed here, I think, to draw our attention." Miss Clara, clutching her shawl against the chill, looked stricken. "Placed? But why, Mr. Sherlock Holmes? To what purpose?" Sherlock Holmes's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "To mislead, mademoiselle. To suggest a narrative that may not be true. But come, let us return to the manor. I must examine the study once more, and then we shall search the house. Every room, every cupboard must yield its secrets." The party returned to the manor, the guests trailing behind like reluctant shadows. Sherlock Holmes's arrival had shifted the atmosphere. Where there had been confusion and fear, there was now a sense of purpose, tempered by the knowledge that his keen intellect would leave no stone unturned. The guests, aware of their status as suspects, exchanged guarded glances, their earlier politeness giving way to a palpable tension. In the study, Sherlock Holmes resumed his examination with a meticulousness that bordered on reverence. He moved from the desk to the safe, then to the window, his magnifying glass catching the light as he peered at every surface. The blood-stained dagger, still resting on the desk, drew his particular attention. He lifted it carefully, holding it to the light and noting the intricate engravings on the hilt, a pattern of vines and crosses that suggested a medieval origin. "This dagger," he said, addressing Hastings and Miss Clara, who stood nearby, "is not merely a weapon. It is a relic, likely one of Sir Reginald's treasures. Its presence here is no accident. Tell me, mademoiselle, did your uncle ever speak of such a dagger?" Miss Clara shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. He had many artifacts, but I never saw this one. He kept his most valuable items locked away, either in the safe or in a hidden compartment he once mentioned." Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A hidden compartment? Most interesting. Where might this be?" Miss Clara hesitated, then indicated spot, his fingers probing the woodwork with delicate precision.
A faint click sounded and the panel swung open, revealing a small recess. Inside was a velvet-lined box, empty save for a single scrap of parchment. Sherlock Holmes unfolded it with care, revealing a series of cryptic symbols, lines and dots arranged in a grid with a Latin inscription beneath. Veritas in umbris. Truth in the shadows, Sherlock Holmes translated, his voice low. A cipher, perhaps, or a clue to the Templar treasure your uncle sought. This parchment was meant to be found, but by whom? And why is the box empty? Hastings, peering over Sherlock Holmes's shoulder, frowned. Could the thief have taken the contents and left this as a taunt? Possibly, Sherlock Holmes replied, folding the parchment and slipping it into his pocket. But the thief, if there is one, is clever. They wish us to believe Sir Reginald was taken or killed, yet they leave clues that suggest otherwise. We must proceed with caution. The search of the manor began in earnest, with Sherlock Holmes directing Hastings and Jenkins to examine the ground floor, while he and Miss Clara tackled the upper rooms. The guests were instructed to remain in the drawing room under the watchful eye of Mr. Reed, whose nervous demeanor did little to inspire confidence. The manor, with its labyrinthine corridors and countless nooks, seemed to guard its secrets jealously, but Sherlock Holmes's methodical approach left no corner unexplored. In Sir Reginald's bedroom, Sherlock Holmes discovered a second clue, a small notebook tucked beneath a pillow, its pages filled with hasty sketches of the same cryptic symbols found in the hidden compartment. A single entry dated the previous day read, "Must protect the key. Trust no one, not even those closest." The words sent a chill through Hastings, who had joined Sherlock Holmes upstairs. "Trust no one," Hastings repeated. "Do you think Sir Reginald suspected someone in the house?" Sherlock Holmes nodded, his expression grave. It is clear he felt threatened. But by whom? And why stage a disappearance? We must consider the possibility that Sir Reginald is not a victim, but a player in this drama. The search yielded little else of note, save for a faint scuff mark on the floor of the attic, suggesting something heavy had been moved recently. Sherlock Holmes marked the spot for further investigation, but said nothing, his mind already turning over the accumulating evidence. As evening approached, the guests reconvened in the drawing room, their nerves frayed by the day's events. Sherlock Holmes stood before them, his demeanor calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I have examined the scene, the clues, and your statements. It is clear that Sir Reginald's disappearance is no accident. Someone in this house knows more than they have revealed. I urge you to speak now, for the truth will not remain."
Hidden. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Dr. Mortimer's lips tightened, Mr. Grayson shifted uncomfortably, and Mrs. Langley's hands trembled in her lap. Mr. Crane, as ever, stared into the distance, his face a mask. Mr. Reed, however, seemed on the verge of speaking, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Before he could find his voice, a sharp knock sounded at the front door. Jenkins, who had been hovering nearby, hurried to answer it. Moments later, he returned with a local constable, a stout man named Sergeant Waller, whose ruddy face bespoke a life of hearty meals and little excitement. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," the sergeant said, removing his helmet, "I've come about Sir Reginald. There's been a development. A farmer found a man's shoe in a ditch a mile from here. Matches the pair Sir Reginald was wearing. And there's blood on it, sir. Fresh blood." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Miss Clara swayed and Hastings steadied her with a gentle hand. Sherlock Holmes, however, remained impassive, his eyes fixed on the sergeant. "Show me," he said simply. As the constable led the way, Sherlock Holmes turned to Hastings, his voice low. "The plot thickens, mon ami. But fear not, the little grey cells are at work, and they will not rest until the truth is revealed." Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The discovery of the blood-stained shoe cast a deeper shadow over Ashbourne Manor, as though the very walls absorbed the growing dread. The guests, confined to the drawing room under Sherlock Holmes's strict instructions, exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier civility fraying under the weight of suspicion. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and the faint tang of fear, and the fire in the hearth did little to warm the chilled atmosphere. Sherlock Holmes, accompanied by Captain Hastings and Sergeant Waller, examined the new evidence in the library, a room adjacent to the drawing room, where a large oak table served as a makeshift evidence station. The shoe, a polished leather brogue, was indeed one of Sir Reginald Ashburn's, its mate still residing in his wardrobe. The blood, smeared along the sole and laces, was fresh enough to suggest recent violence, yet not so copious as to confirm a fatal injury. Sherlock Holmes held the shoe with gloved hands, his magnifying glass tracing every crease and stain. "Observe, Hastings," he said, his voice low and precise. "The blood is concentrated here on the outer edge, as if the shoe were dragged through a small pool. Yet the sole shows no significant wear, no mud beyond one might expect from a brief walk. This was not worn by a man fleeing for his life." Hastings frowned, his military mind struggling to keep pace with Sherlock Holmes's deductions. "Then how did it end up in a ditch a mile away? Could someone have planted it, as with the coat fragment?"
Exactement, mon ami. The shoe, like the cloth, is a deliberate clue, placed to suggest a narrative of violence and flight. But the absence of mud, the careful placement of blood, it is too precise, too staged. Someone wishes us to believe Sir Reginald met a grim fate. Yet I suspect he may still be among us, in one form or another. Sergeant Waller, scratching his head, looked skeptical. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, but if Sir Reginald's alive, where is he? We've searched the manor top to bottom and there's no sign of him. And this blood, it's real enough." Sherlock Holmes's mustache twitched, a sign of his amusement at the sergeant's earnestness. "Real, yes, but whose? Blood can be procured easily enough. A cut finger, a slaughtered fowl. We must not leap to conclusions. Now, Sergeant, tell me precisely where the shoe was found." Waller described the location. A muddy ditch along a quiet lane, hidden by overhanging willows, roughly a mile from the manor's gates. A farmer, passing by at dawn, had spotted the shoe glinting in the early light and reported it to the village constable. Sherlock Holmes listened intently, his fingers steepled, his mind already mapping the terrain. "Very well," he said at last. "I shall visit this ditch myself, but first, I must continue my interviews. The guests, I think, have more to reveal. Hastings, summon them one by one to the library. We shall begin with Miss Clara." Miss Clara Ashbourne entered the library with a composure that belied her evident strain. Her eyes, red-rimmed from sleeplessness, met Sherlock Holmes's with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She sat opposite him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as Hastings took his place by the window, notebook at the ready. "Mademoiselle," Sherlock Holmes began, his tone gentle but probing, "you have been most helpful, but I must ask you to recount the evening once more. Every detail, no matter how trivial, may hold the key to your uncle's fate." Miss Clara nodded, her voice steady despite her evident emotion. "Uncle was in high spirits during dinner. He spoke at length about the manuscripts, saying they contained a cipher that could unlock a Templar treasure. He was excited, almost too excited, I thought. After dinner, he gave his lecture, then excused himself to fetch the manuscripts from his study. That was the last I saw of him." Sherlock Holmes leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. "And his manner? Did he seem anxious, distracted, perhaps fearful?" Miss Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening. "He was preoccupied. He kept glancing at the clock, as if he were expecting something. And he was unusually curt with Dr. Mortimer when she pressed him about the manuscript's provenance." Sherlock Holmes made a note, his pen moving with swift precision.
"Absence? I was in the drawing room," she replied. "I spoke with Mrs. Langley about her charity work, then with Mr. Grayson about his collection of Roman coins. I didn't leave the room until I went to check on Uncle." Sherlock Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, mademoiselle. You may return to the drawing room. Send in Dr. Mortimer next." Dr. Evelyn Mortimer entered with the air of a woman accustomed to commanding attention. Her sharp features and piercing gaze suggested a mind as formidable as Sherlock Holmes' own, though lacking his finesse. She sat with a rigid posture, her hands resting on the arms of the chair like a monarch on a throne. "Dr. Mortimer," Sherlock Holmes began, "you are a scholar of repute with a particular interest in medieval history. Sir Reginald's manuscripts must have been of great interest to you." "They were," she admitted, her tone clipped. "His claims about a Templar cipher were bold, perhaps exaggerated, but I wish to examine the texts myself. His disappearance is inconvenient, to say the least." "Inconvenient?" Sherlock Holmes raised an eyebrow. "A curious choice of words. Tell me, where were you when Sir Reginald left the drawing room?" "In the drawing room, as I told you yesterday," she replied, her voice edged with impatience. "I was discussing a recent excavation with Mr. Reed. We were all there. Ask anyone." Sherlock Holmes' smile was faint but piercing. "And yet, Dr. Mortimer, you were seen by the conservatory door at 10:30, adjusting your shawl. A small detail, perhaps, but one you omitted." Dr. Mortimer's eyes widened briefly before narrowing. "I stepped out for air. The room was stifling. Is that a crime?" "Not at all," Sherlock Holmes said smoothly. "But omissions, even small ones, are significant. You may go." The interviews continued in this manner, each guest subjected to Sherlock Holmes' unrelenting scrutiny. Mr. Lionel Grayson, jovial but evasive, confirmed his conversation with Mrs. Langley, but admitted to stepping into the hall to smoke a cigar around 10:15. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her composure faltering, revealed a financial dispute with Sir Reginald, who had withdrawn support for her charitable foundation. Mr. Victor Crane, the painter, remained taciturn, insisting he had been sketching in the conservatory, though he could produce no sketch to prove it. Mr. Thomas Reed, the solicitor, grew increasingly nervous, confessing that he had checked the safe's contents earlier that day at Sir Reginald's request, but saw nothing amiss. Each interview revealed a web of motives, greed, envy, betrayal, but no definitive proof. Sherlock Holmes, undeterred, catalogued every word, every gesture, his mind weaving connections where others saw only chaos. As the last guest departed, cards, seemingly solid yet fragile under scrutiny. Each guest has a gap, a moment unaccounted for, and each has a reason to wish Sir Reginald harm. But the clues, the dagger, the cloth, the shoe, the cipher, they point to a mind that delights in misdirection. Hastings rubbed his temples, overwhelmed. "But where does that leave us, Sherlock Holmes? Is Sir Reginald dead or alive? And who is orchestrating this charade?" Sherlock Holmes' eyes twinkled with a spark of excitement. "Patience, Hastings. The truth lies in the contradictions. Tonight we shall dine with our suspects, and I shall observe them closely. A man may lie with his words, but his eyes, his hands, they betray him. And tomorrow we visit the ditch. The game, as ever, is afoot." As they prepared to join the guests for dinner, a faint noise, a creak from the floor above, caught Sherlock Holmes' attention. He paused, his head tilted, then smiled faintly. "The manner speaks, Hastings, and we must listen." Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The dining room of Ashbourne Manor, with its long mahogany table and flickering candelabra, was a stage set for tension. The guests, seated under the watchful gaze of ancestral portraits, ate their meal in near silence, the clink of cutlery against porcelain punctuating the strained atmosphere. Sherlock Holmes, impeccable in his evening attire, presided at one end of the table, his demeanor serene yet piercing, as if he could see through the very souls of those around him. Captain Hastings, seated to his right, observed the gathering with a soldier's instinct, noting the subtle signs of unease, a trembling hand, a darted glance, a forced smile. The meal, roast lamb with rosemary, accompanied by a fine claret, did little to ease the mood. Miss Clara Ashbourne, pale but composed, picked at her food, her eyes occasionally meeting Sherlock Holmes's with a silent plea for answers. Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, her expression one of barely concealed impatience, cut her meat with surgical precision. Mr. Lionel Grayson, usually jovial, was subdued, his laugh replaced by a nervous cough. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, elegant in mourning black, sipped her wine with a trembling hand, while Mr. Victor Crane, the painter, stared at his plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. Mr. Thomas Reed, the solicitor, fidgeted with his napkin, his brow glistening with sweat. Sherlock Holmes, ever the orchestrator, broke the silence with a disarming question. "Tell me, mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice soft but commanding. "What is it about Sir Reginald's manuscripts that so captivates you all? A Templar treasure, perhaps, but what else? Knowledge? Power? Or something more personal?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Dr. Mortimer was the first to respond, her tone sharp. "The manuscripts are a scholarly—"
"That is reason enough." Mr. Grayson nodded, though his enthusiasm seemed forced. "Quite right. Sir Reginald's find was the talk of antiquarian circles. A treasure, yes, but also a legacy. He was generous to share it with us." Mrs. Langley's lips tightened. "Generous? He was selective, Mr. Grayson. He promised me funding for my foundation, then withdrew it, citing those manuscripts as his priority. I wonder if they were worth his life." The remark drew gasps, and Mr. Crane's fork clattered against his plate. He looked up, his dark eyes flashing. "That's a bold accusation, Mrs. Langley. Are you suggesting one of us killed him for those papers?" Sherlock Holmes raised a hand, his gesture calming the rising tension. "No accusations, Monsieur Crane. Merely observations. But let us consider. The manuscripts are gone. The safe is empty, and Sir Reginald is missing. Yet the clues, the dagger, the cloth, the shoe, point to a crime staged with theatrical precision. Why, I ask, would a murderer leave such obvious traces?" Mr. Reed, his voice quavering, spoke up. "Perhaps to confuse us, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, to make us think Sir Reginald was attacked when he might have left of his own accord." Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. "An interesting theory, Monsieur Reed. But if Sir Reginald left willingly, why the blood? Why the torn coat? No, the evidence suggests a mind at work, a mind that wishes us to chase shadows." The conversation faltered, and the meal concluded in uneasy silence. As the guests retired to the drawing room for coffee, Sherlock Holmes drew Hastings aside, his voice low. "Mon ami, did you observe? Mrs. Langley's accusation was calculated, designed to provoke. And Mr. Reed, he knows more than he admits. His nervousness betrays him." Hastings nodded, his mind racing. "But what about Crane? He's so quiet, it's almost suspicious. And Dr. Mortimer, she's too confident, as if she's hiding something." Sherlock Holmes smiled faintly. "All are hiding something, Hastings. The key is to discern what is relevant. Come, let us join them. The evening is young, and the guilty will reveal themselves through their actions." In the drawing room, the guests sipped their coffee, their polite facades crumbling under the weight of Sherlock Holmes's presence. Sergeant Waller, who had joined them after delivering the shoe, sat awkwardly in a corner, his notebook open but unused. Sherlock Holmes, ever observant, moved among the guests, his questions seemingly innocuous, yet laced with intent. To Dr. Mortimer, he remarked, "Your knowledge of medieval ciphers must be extensive. Did Sir Reginald ever consult you on his findings?"
Grayson chuckled, though it sounded forced. Not that he shared Mr. Sherlock Holmes. His focus was all Templars and ciphers, a pity, really. To Mrs. Langley he said, "Your foundation does admirable work. Was Sir Reginald's withdrawal of funds a significant blow?" Her lips trembled, but her voice was steady. "It was a setback, yes. But I would never harm him over it. He was a friend, despite our differences." Mr. Crane, when questioned about his sketching, produced a vague description of a landscape he claimed to have worked on, though he offered no proof. Mr. Reed, pressed about the safe, stammered that he had only checked its contents as part of his duties, not touched them. As the evening wore on, Sherlock Holmes's questions grew sharper, his observations more pointed. He noted the way Dr. Mortimer's fingers tightened around her coffee cup when the manuscripts were mentioned, the fleeting glance Mr. Grayson exchanged with Mrs. Langley, the way Mr. Crane's eyes lingered on the door as if longing to escape. Mr. Reed's nervous fidgeting intensified, his gaze darting to Miss Clara, who sat quietly, her face a mask of sorrow. It was then that Sergeant Waller, emboldened by Sherlock Holmes' example, spoke up. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I've been thinking. That shoe in the ditch, it's too convenient, ain't it? Like someone wanted us to find it, and the blood, it don't look right for a murder. I reckon Sir Reginald might have staged it all to throw us off." The room fell silent, the guests staring at the sergeant with a mixture of surprise and indignation. Dr. Mortimer scoffed. "Preposterous! Why would Sir Reginald abandon his home, his work, his niece?" Sherlock Holmes, however, regarded Waller with approval. "A fine observation, Sergeant. The shoe, like the cloth and the dagger, is a red herring, a distraction meant to lead us astray. But to what end? That is the question." Miss Clara, her voice trembling, spoke up. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, if Uncle staged this, where is he? And why? He loved this manor, his work. He would never leave me without a word." Sherlock Holmes turned to her, his expression softening. "Mademoiselle, your uncle's actions are indeed puzzling, but I believe the answer lies in the manuscripts and in the secrets they hold. Someone in this room knows more than they admit. I propose a test." He paused, letting the tension build. "Tomorrow, I shall visit the ditch where the shoe was found. But tonight, I ask each of you to write a brief account of your movements from 9 to 11 last night. Omit nothing, no matter how trivial. Deliver them to me by morning." The guests exchanged wary glances, but none dared protest. As they dispersed to the secrets, as they prepared to retire, a faint sound, a muffled thud from the upper floor, caught Sherlock Holmes's attention. He paused, his head tilted, then smiled. "The manner speaks again, Hastings. We must be ready to listen." Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The morning dawned grey and heavy, the clouds over Ashbourne Manor swollen with the promise of rain. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the estate itself held its breath, awaiting the next revelation in the mystery of Sir Reginald Ashbourne's disappearance. The guests, confined to the manor by Sherlock Holmes's decree, moved through the halls with the wariness of caged animals, their eyes darting to one another with suspicion. The discovery of the blood-stained shoe, coupled with Sherlock Holmes's request for written accounts, had heightened the tension,
and the breakfast table was a study in strained silence. Sherlock Holmes, Captain Hastings, ever loyal, sat beside him, his notebook discreetly tucked into his pocket. The guests, Miss Clara Ashbourne, Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, Mr. Lionel Grayson, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, Mr. Victor Crane, and Mr. Thomas Reed, ate sparingly, their appetites dulled by the weight of the investigation. Sergeant Waller, stationed by the door, watched the proceedings with a mixture of awe and unease, his rural simplicity no match for the complexities unfolding before him. As the meal concluded, Sherlock Holmes collected the written accounts, each sealed in an envelope with the author's name scrawled across it. He placed them in a leather portfolio with a precision that suggested he already anticipated their contents. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of authority. "These accounts will be most illuminating. I shall review them presently, but first, I must visit the ditch where the shoe was found. Sergeant Waller, you will accompany me. Hastings, remain here and ensure no one leaves the manor." Hastings nodded, though he felt a pang of disappointment at being left behind. "What should I watch for, Sherlock Holmes?" Sherlock Holmes's eyes twinkled with a hint of amusement. "Watch their faces, mon ami. The guilty will betray themselves through the smallest gesture. A glance, a tremor, a hesitation. And keep an eye on Mr. Reed. His nervousness is pronounced." With that, Sherlock Holmes and Sergeant Waller departed for the lane, leaving Hastings to oversee the restless guests. The manor seemed to close in around them, its opulent rooms feeling more like a prison with each passing hour. Hastings stationed himself in the drawing room, where the guests gathered, their attempts at conversation stilted and forced. Miss Clara sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the gardens, while Dr. Mortimer leafed through a book with feigned interest. Mr. Grayson paced,
his joviality replaced by restless energy, and Mrs. Langley clutched a handkerchief, her eyes red-rimmed. Mr. Crane, as ever, remained aloof, sketching idly in a corner, while Mr. Reed fidgeted with his cufflinks, his face pale. Back at the lane, Sherlock Holmes knelt beside the ditch, his magnifying glass glinting in the dim light. The spot was secluded, shielded by willows that drooped over the muddy water. The earth around the ditch was soft, marked by the farmer's footprints and those of the constable who had retrieved the shoe. Sherlock Holmes examined the ground with meticulous care, his fingers probing the soil for clues invisible to the untrained eye. "Observe, Sergeant," he said, pointing to a faint impression in the mud. "This mark, too regular to be a footprint, too precise to be accidental. It is the edge of a box, perhaps, or a case. Something was placed here briefly before the shoe was left." Waller scratched his head, his brow furrowed. "A box, sir? You mean someone brought the shoe here in something?" "Precisement," Sherlock Holmes replied, rising to his feet. "The shoe was not discarded in haste. It was carried here, placed with care, and the blood applied to suggest violence. But this mark, it tells a different story. Something was hidden here, then removed. We must search the area further." Their search yielded a small but significant find, a single pearl, half buried in the mud, its luster dulled but unmistakable. Sherlock Holmes held it up to the light, his expression one of quiet triumph. "A pearl, Sergeant, not a common item to find in a ditch. It suggests a woman's presence, or a man's attempt to implicate one. We shall keep this little treasure safe." Returning to the manor, Sherlock Holmes retired to the library to review the written accounts, his portfolio spread before him like a general's battle plan. Hastings joined him, eager for insights. The accounts, while consistent with the guests' earlier statements, revealed subtle discrepancies that Sherlock Holmes's keen mind seized upon. Dr. Mortimer's account was precise, but omitted her brief absence by the conservatory door, a detail Sherlock Holmes had already noted. Mr. Grayson's narrative was verbose, filled with unnecessary details about his cigar, as if to obscure the timeline of his movements. Mrs. Langley's account was brief, almost curt, and avoided mention of her financial dispute with Sir Reginald. Mr. Crane's was maddeningly vague, claiming only that he was occupied with his art. Mr. Reed's account was the most revealing, his handwriting shaky as he described checking the safe earlier in the day, adding a new detail: he had seen a small leather pouch inside, which was gone when the safe was found open. But it was Miss Clara's account that drew Sherlock Holmes's closest scrutiny. Her timeline was meticulous, her handwriting elegant, yet one sentence stood out. At 10:15, I heard a faint thud from the direction of Uncle's study, but I thought it was merely a book falling. The detail absent from her earlier statements was a spark in the darkness of the case. "Hastings," Sherlock Holmes said, closing the portfolio with a snap, "this thud, it is the clue we have been seeking. A sound overlooked in the moment but significant in retrospect. It places an event in the study at a precise time, and it contradicts the notion of a silent crime." Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Do you think it was Sir Reginald, or the thief?" Sherlock Holmes' eyes narrowed. "It was neither, I suspect, nor both. The thud suggests movement, something heavy, perhaps a body, perhaps an object. We must revisit the study. There is something we have missed." The two returned to the study, where the blood-stained dagger still lay on the desk, a silent sentinel of the mystery. Sherlock Holmes moved to the bookcase, his fingers tracing the spines of Sir Reginald's collection. He paused at a volume of medieval poetry, its position slightly askew. With a gentle tug, he pulled it free, revealing a hidden lever. A soft click echoed, and a section of the bookcase swung inward, exposing a narrow passage. "Mon Dieu!" Sherlock Holmes murmured, his voice tinged with excitement. "A secret passage. This manor holds its secrets well." Hastings peered into the dark, his heart racing. "Where does it lead, Sherlock Holmes?" "To answers, I hope," Sherlock Holmes replied, lighting a small lantern from the desk. "Come, Hastings, we shall explore, but with caution. The truth lies in the shadows." The passage was cramped, its walls damp and lined with cobwebs. It descended steeply, twisting through the manor's foundations before emerging in a small cellar beneath the east wing. The air was musty, heavy with the scent of earth. In the corner, partially covered by a tarp, was a wooden crate, its lid ajar. Inside, Sherlock Holmes found a bundle of papers, not the manuscripts, but letters, written in Sir Reginald's hand, addressed to an unknown recipient. One line stood out. "The cipher must be protected at all costs. They are closer than I feared." Sherlock Holmes folded the letters carefully, his expression grave. "These are not the manuscripts, Hastings, but they're a clue to Sir Reginald's state of mind. He was afraid, and he was hiding something, or someone." As they emerged from the passage, the manor seemed to hum with secrets, each clue a thread in the tapestry Sherlock Holmes was weaving. The thud, the pearl, the letters, all pointed to a truth just out of reach. But Sherlock Holmes, with his little grey cells, was closing in. Chapter 7.
Melancholic veil over the estate. The guests, confined to the drawing room under Captain Hastings's watchful eye, grew increasingly restless, their polite facades crumbling under the strain of Sherlock Holmes's relentless investigation. Each seemed to sense that the net was tightening, though none could guess how close the truth lay. Sherlock Holmes, having emerged from the secret passage, stood in the study, the letters from the crate spread before him on Sir Reginald's desk. The blood-stained dagger, the open safe, and the cryptic parchment with its Latin inscription, Veritas in Umbris, lay nearby, a constellation of clues that his mind was piecing together with surgical precision. Captain Hastings, standing by the window, watched his friend with a mixture of awe and impatience, eager for the next revelation. "Hastings, mon ami," Sherlock Holmes said, his voice low and deliberate. "These letters confirm what I suspected. Sir Reginald was not merely a scholar, but a man entangled in a web of secrets. He feared betrayal, perhaps from within this very house.
But the question remains, who is they he speaks of? And why go to such lengths to stage his disappearance? Hastings frowned, his mind grappling with the complexity. Could it be one of the guests? Dr. Mortimer, perhaps, with her ambition? Or Grayson, with his debts? Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. All are suspects, Hastings. But we must not leap to conclusions. The letters suggest a conspiracy, but the clues, the dagger, the cloth, the shoe, the pearl, point to a single mind orchestrating this drama. We must probe deeper, and I believe the guests will reveal more under pressure. To that end, Sherlock Holmes summoned the guests to the library, where the atmosphere was thick with suspicion. The rain drummed against the windows, amplifying the tension as they filed in, their faces a gallery of unease. Miss Clara Ashburn sat near the fire, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes searching Sherlock Holmes's face for hope. Dr. Evelyn Mortimer stood rigid, her scholarly pride barely masking her agitation. Mr. Lionel Grayson's joviality was gone, replaced by a nervous tick in his jaw. Mrs. Beatrice Langley clutched her handkerchief, her composure fraying, while Mr. Victor Crane's brooding silence seemed to deepen. Mr. Thomas Reed, the solicitor, was a picture of anxiety, his fingers twisting a pen until it snapped. Mesdames et messieurs, Sherlock Holmes began, standing before the group with the air of a conductor before an orchestra. The evidence mounts, and the truth draws near. Sir Reginald's disappearance is no simple act of violence. The letters I have found suggest he feared for his life, and the clues left behind, the dagger, the cloth, the shoe, are deliberate, designed to mislead. But one detail.
Keep. The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Dr. Mortimer was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the silence.
This is absurd, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. You accuse us without evidence. I was in the drawing room, as I've said, and I heard nothing unusual. Sherlock Holmes' moustache twitched, a sign of his amusement. Nothing unusual, Dr. Mortimer. Yet Miss Clara heard a thud, a sound you did not mention in your account. And you, Mr. Grayson, you were in the hall at 10:15, smoking a cigar. Did you hear anything? Grayson shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to Mrs. Langley. I might have heard a noise, but I thought it was the wind. The manor creaks, you know. Mrs. Langley's voice trembled as she spoke. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I was with Mr. Grayson earlier, but I retired to my room shortly after 10. I heard nothing, I swear. But Sir Reginald, he was acting strangely that night, secretive. I thought it was the manuscripts, but perhaps he was hiding something else. Sherlock Holmes' gaze turned to Mr. Crane, who had remained silent, his pencil scratching idly on a sketchpad. Monsieur Crane, you claim to have been sketching in the conservatory. Yet no one saw you, and you produce no sketch. What were you truly doing at 10:15? Crane's dark eyes met Sherlock Holmes's, unyielding. I was sketching. I don't need an audience to create. If you doubt me, that's your affair. Sherlock Holmes turned to Mr. Reed, whose face had grown paler with each question. And you, Monsieur Reed, you checked the safe earlier that day and saw a leather pouch. Why did you omit this from your initial statement? Reed's hands shook, and he stammered, I forgot. It was a small detail, nothing significant. I swear I didn't touch the safe after that. Sherlock Holmes' eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, letting the silence press against Reed like a physical force. It was then that Miss Clara, unable to contain herself, spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I must tell you, last week, Uncle mentioned a letter he received, anonymous, warning him to guard the manuscripts closely. He was shaken, but he wouldn't say more. I thought it was nothing, but now... The revelation sent a ripple through the room. Dr. Mortimer's lips tightened. Grayson's tic intensified, and Mrs. Langley gasped softly. Crane's pencil paused, and Reed's face drained of colour. Sherlock Holmes, however, remained impassive, his mind cataloguing the new information. An anonymous letter.
Believe Sir Reginald's fear led him to stage his disappearance. Or someone else used that fear to their advantage. We shall see. The meeting adjourned, but the tension lingered. Each guest retreating to their thoughts, their secrets heavier than ever. Sherlock Holmes, returning to the study, examined the letters again, his attention drawn to a single phrase. They are closer than I feared. He cross-referenced it with the cryptic parchment's inscription, Veritas in Umbris, and a faint smile played on his lips. Hastings, he said, beckoning his friend. We have been tracing shadows, but now a light emerges. The anonymous letter, the thud, the passage, these are not isolated events, but parts of a tapestry. Someone in this house sent that letter, and someone knows what happened at 10:15. Hastings, ever eager, leaned forward. Who, Sherlock Holmes? Reed? He's the most nervous. Sherlock Holmes's smile widened. Nervousness is not guilt, mon ami, though it is a clue. Reed knows something, but so do others. Tonight, we shall dine again, and I shall apply a little pressure. The guilty will crack, Hastings, as they always do. As evening fell, the rain intensified, cloaking the manor in a curtain of sound. During dinner, Sherlock Holmes was at his most disarming, his conversation light but laced with barbs. He spoke of ciphers, of betrayal, of the fragility of trust, each word chosen to unsettle. And unsettle it did. Reed spilled his wine, Grayson laughed too loudly, and Mrs. Langley's hand shook as she reached for her glass. As the meal ended, a sudden crash echoed from the upper floor, startling the guests. Sherlock Holmes was on his feet in an instant, his eyes alight. The manor speaks again, Hastings. Let us see what it has to say. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The crash that echoed through Ashbourne Manor sent a jolt through the dining room, shattering the fragile veneer of civility that had held the guests together. The rain, now a steady downpour, battered the windows, amplifying the sense of isolation that gripped the estate. The guests froze, their faces a gallery of alarm and suspicion, as Sherlock Holmes, with the agility of a cat, moved toward the door, his eyes alight with purpose. Captain Hastings followed close behind, his heart pounding while the others hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. Remain here, Sherlock Holmes instructed the guests, his voice calm but commanding. Hastings, with me. We must ascertain the source of this disturbance. The two was in disarray. A small table lay overturned. Its contents, a crystal decanter, a few books, and a candle, scattered across the floor. The candle, still lit, flickered dangerously close to a curtain, and Sherlock Holmes swiftly extinguished it with a deft pinch of his fingers. Hastings, scanning the room, noticed a crumpled piece of paper beneath the table, its edges singed, as if it had been held too close to a flame.
Sherlock Holmes retrieved the paper, smoothing it with care. It was a letter, written in a hurried hand, and though the ink was smudged, a few words were legible. The cipher, danger. Trust no one. The signature, if there had been one, was lost to the burn marks. Sherlock Holmes' eyes narrowed as he studied the fragment, his mind racing through possibilities. "Hastings," he said, his voice low. "This letter is recent, written within the last day, I suspect. The ink is fresh, the paper unyellowed. Someone in this house attempted to destroy it, and in their haste, they caused this chaos." Hastings, his military instincts kicking in, scanned the room for further clues. But who, Sherlock Holmes? And why here, in this out-of-the-way room? Sherlock Holmes' moustache twitched, a sign of his growing excitement. "This room, mon ami, is no accident. It is a place where one might seek privacy, a place to write, to hide, or to destroy evidence. The crash was no mere accident. It was a moment of panic. Someone was interrupted, and they fled, leaving this behind." As they returned to the dining room, the guests were visibly shaken, their earlier restraint giving way to raw emotion. Miss Clara Ashbourne, her face pale, rose to meet them, her hands trembling. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, what was it? Is it about Uncle?" Sherlock Holmes held up the singed letter, his gaze sweeping the room. "This, mesdames et messieurs, is a piece of the puzzle. A letter, written in haste, warning of danger and the cipher. One of you knows its author, and one of you caused this disturbance. I urge you to speak now, for the truth will not remain hidden." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by a stifled sob from Mrs. Beatrice Langley. She rose, her handkerchief pressed to her lips, her eyes brimming with tears. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," she said, her voice breaking, "I can bear it no longer. I must tell you. I saw something last night, something I should have mentioned before." The room turned to her, the air electric with anticipation. Sherlock Holmes' expression running. He didn't see me, but he looked frightened. Mr. Reed, who had been sitting silently, leapt to his feet, his face ashen. "That's a lie! I was in the billiard room until I retired to my room at 10. I never went upstairs." Mrs. Langley's eyes widened, but she held her ground. "I know what I saw, Mr. Reed. You were there and you were in a hurry. I didn't think much of it then, but now, with all this—" Her voice trailed off, and she sank back into her chair, overcome. Sherlock Holmes turned to Reed, his gaze unrelenting. "Monsieur Reed, you've been most reticent about your movements. You checked the safe earlier that day, saw a leather pouch, and now you are seen near the study at the critical hour. What do you say to this?" Reed's hands shook, and sweat beaded on his brow. I swear I was in my room. Mrs. Langley's mistaken, or she's lying to protect herself. I had no reason to harm Sir Reginald. He was my client, my friend." Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, her voice sharp, interjected. "This is becoming a farce, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Accusations flung without proof. If Mr. Reed was upstairs, why not ask Mr. Crane? He was supposedly sketching alone, conveniently unaccounted for." Mr. Crane's head snapped up, his dark eyes flashing. "I've told you, I was in the conservatory. I don't need to justify my art to anyone.
If you want a suspect, look at Grayson. He's drowning in debt, and he was cozying up to Sir Reginald all evening. Mr. Lionel Grayson's face reddened. How dare you, Crane? I was with Mrs. Langley, as she herself confirmed. If anyone's hiding something, it's you, skulking about with your sketches. The room erupted in accusations, voices rising in a cacophony of fear and mistrust. Miss Clara, tears streaming down her face, stood and cried, Enough! My uncle is missing, perhaps dead, and you tear at each other like vultures. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, please, find him. Sherlock Holmes raised a hand, and the room fell silent, his authority absolute. Mesdames et messieurs, your passions betray you, but they also reveal. Madame Langley, your courage in speaking is noted. Monsieur Reed, your denials are unconvincing. But fear not, the truth is emerging like a picture from the fog. I ask you all to retire to your rooms. Tomorrow we shall gather again, and I shall lay a trap for the guilty. As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with doubt and dread, Sherlock Holmes drew Hastings aside, the singed letter still in his hand.
Of triumph. Patience, Hastings. The guilty are growing careless. The letter, the thud, the passage, they are threads in a tapestry, and tomorrow we shall pull them tight. But tonight we must watch. The manor has more to say. As they prepared to retire, Sherlock Holmes paused by the study door, his ear cocked toward the upper floor. A faint creak, barely audible, reached his ears, and he smiled faintly. The game, Hastings, is nearing its climax.
Chapter 9. The Trap. The rain had ceased by morning, leaving Ashbourne Manor cloaked in a damp grey mist that clung to the windows like a shroud. The atmosphere within was no less oppressive, the guests moving through the halls with the wariness of those who sensed an invisible noose tightening. The revelations of the previous night, Mrs. Langley's accusation against Mr. Reed, the singed letter, and the mounting evidence of a staged disappearance had left the company fractured, their trust in one another eroded to nothing. Sherlock Holmes, however, seemed invigorated by the chaos, his neat figure radiating a quiet confidence as he prepared to spring his trap. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful companion, joined Sherlock Holmes in the library after breakfast, where the detective was arranging his notes with meticulous care. The singed letter, the cryptic parchment, the pearl from the ditch, and the accounts of the guests lay spread before him, a mosaic of clues awaiting their final arrangement. The blood-stained dagger, now carefully wrapped in cloth, rested on a side table, its presence a constant reminder of the mystery's darker edge. "Hastings, mon ami," Sherlock Holmes said, his voice low and deliberate. "Today we shall force the truth into the open. The guilty party, or parties, grow careless, their lies unraveling under pressure. The crash last night, the letter, Mrs. Langley's revelation, these are signs of desperation. Tonight we shall gather the guests, and I shall present a version of events that will provoke the culprit into revealing themselves." Hastings, his curiosity piqued, leaned forward. "A trap, Sherlock Holmes. What will you do? Accuse someone directly?" Sherlock Holmes' moustache twitched with a faint smile. "Not accuse, Hastings, but suggest. I shall lay out a narrative close to the truth, but not quite, so that the guilty will feel compelled to correct me, or to act in haste. The little grey cells, they have been working, and I see the shape of this crime clearly now." Before Hastings could press for details, Sergeant Waller entered.
his ruddy face flushed with news. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, we've had another find. One of the maids, tidying the east wing, found a handkerchief in the linen cupboard, embroidered with Sir Reginald's initials, and it's got a spot of blood on it." Sherlock Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest. "Show me, Sergeant. Every clue, no matter how small, is a piece of the puzzle." The handkerchief, a fine linen square with the monogram R.A., was indeed stained with a small, dark spot, similar to the blood on the dagger and shoe. Sherlock Holmes examined it with his
"Suggest violence where none may exist." Hastings frowned, his mind struggling to keep pace. "But whose blood is it, Sherlock Holmes? If not Sir Reginald's, then whose?" Sherlock Holmes folded the handkerchief carefully, slipping it into an envelope. "That, Hastings, is a question we shall answer tonight. But first, we must prepare the stage." The day passed in a flurry of quiet activity. Sherlock Holmes, with Sergeant Waller's assistance, searched the east wing, focusing on the linen cupboard and its surroundings. They found no further clues, but Sherlock Holmes noted the cupboard's proximity to the secret passage, its door just a few paces from the hidden entrance behind the study's bookcase. "Convenient," he remarked, his eyes narrowing. "A place to hide, to watch, or to plant evidence." As evening approached, Sherlock Holmes summoned the guests to the drawing room, where a fire roared in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the sombre faces. Miss Clara Ashbourne sat near the front, her expression a mixture of hope and dread. Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, her scholarly composure strained, adjusted her spectacles repeatedly. Mr. Lionel Grayson, his joviality long gone, sat with his hands clasped tightly. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, pale and drawn, clutched her handkerchief, unmarked, Hastings noted, unlike the one found. Mr. Victor Crane's brooding silence seemed to deepen, his sketchpad abandoned. Mr. Thomas Reed, his face a mask of anxiety, avoided Sherlock Holmes' gaze. "Mesdames et messieurs," Sherlock Holmes began, standing before the fireplace, his small figure commanding the room. "We have reached a critical moment. The clues, the dagger, the cloth, the shoe, the pearl, the letters, and now a handkerchief, point to a crime of cunning design. Sir Reginald Ashbourne has vanished, and I believe I know how and why. Allow me to present my theory." The guests leaned forward, their breaths held, as Sherlock Holmes wove his narrative with deliberate precision. Sir Reginald, obsessed with his Templar manuscripts, received a threat, an anonymous letter warning him to guard his discovery. Fearing betrayal, he devised a plan to protect the cipher, staging his disappearance to throw his enemies off the scent. The blood, the torn cloth, the shoe, these were props in his charade, meant to suggest foul play. But he miscalculated. Someone in this house, aware of his plan, used it to their advantage, removing the manuscripts and leaving these clues to implicate another. A murmur rippled through the room, and Mr. Reed's hands shook visibly. Dr. Mortimer's lips tightened, and Grayson's jaw twitched. Mrs. Langley gasped softly, while Crane's eyes narrowed, his pencil tapping against his knee. Sherlock Holmes
meet someone. The Singe letter found last night was his attempt to warn someone or to mislead us further, but the handkerchief found today tells a different story. It was placed to suggest Sir Reginald's presence in the East Wing, yet its discovery was too convenient, too staged. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "I propose that Sir Reginald is alive, hidden somewhere in this manor, and one of you knows where. Speak now, or I shall reveal my suspicions as to who betrayed him." The silence was deafening, broken only by a sharp intake of breath from Mr. Reed.
He rose, his face pale, his voice trembling. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I can't keep silent any longer. I didn't harm Sir Reginald, I swear, but I saw something that night. In the study, just before 10. I saw Sir Reginald speaking with someone, a shadow in the doorway. I couldn't see who, but they were arguing, and then the thud." The room erupted in gasps, and Miss Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed with triumph, though his expression remained impassive. "A shadow, Monsieur Reed. Most interesting. And why did you not mention this before?" Reed collapsed into his chair, his hands covering his face. "I was afraid. I thought they might come for me next. Sir Reginald was my friend, but he was involved in something dangerous. I didn't know what to do." Sherlock Holmes nodded, his mind racing. "Your fear is noted, Monsieur Reed, but it does not absolve you. The shadow you saw is the key. Tonight we shall search the manor again, focusing on the east wing and the passage. The truth is near, and the guilty will not escape." As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, Sherlock Holmes turned to Hastings, his voice low. "The trap is set, mon ami. Reed's confession is a crack in the facade. The shadow he saw, it is our link to the truth. Tonight we shall find Sir Reginald, or what remains of him." The manor, silent but for the distant drip of rain, seemed to pulse with secrets, and Sherlock Holmes, with his little grey cells, was ready to unravel them. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The atmosphere in Ashbourne Manor was taut as a bowstring, the weight of Mr. Reed's confession hanging heavy in the air. The rain had subsided to a faint drizzle, but the mist outside clung to the windows, shrouding the estate in an eerie half-light. The guests, summoned once more to the drawing room, sat in a tense semicircle, their faces etched with dread and anticipation. Sherlock Holmes stood before them, his small, immaculate figure radiating an authority that silenced even the most defiant among them. Captain Hastings, stationed by the door, felt his heart race, sensing that the climax of the mystery was at hand.
Flickering shadows, amplifying the drama of the moment. Miss Clara Ashbourne, her hands clasped tightly, looked to Sherlock Holmes with a mixture of hope and fear. Dr. Evelyn Mortimer's scholarly composure was fraying, her spectacles glinting as she shifted in her seat. Mr. Lionel Grayson's nervous tic had returned, his fingers drumming on the armrest. Mrs. Beatrice Langley's face was pale, her handkerchief crumpled in her lap. Mr. Victor Crane, ever enigmatic, stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. Mr. Thomas Reed, his confession still echoing, sat hunched, his eyes darting nervously. "Mesdames et messieurs," Sherlock Holmes began, his voice soft but commanding, "we have reached the denouement. The disappearance of Sir Reginald Ashbourne is no simple crime, but a tapestry of deception, woven with care and cunning. Tonight, I shall unravel it, thread by thread, and reveal the truth." He paused, letting the silence build, his gaze lingering on each guest. "Let us begin with the facts. Sir Reginald, a scholar obsessed with a Templar cipher, received an anonymous letter warning him of danger. Fearing betrayal, he staged his disappearance using blood, a torn coat, and a shoe to suggest foul play. The blood-stained dagger, the open safe, the missing manuscripts, these were props in his charade, meant to mislead. But someone in this house turned his plan against him, using it to conceal a deeper crime. A murmur rippled through the room, but Sherlock Holmes raised a hand, silencing it. The clues tell a story. The blood, never enough to suggest death, was applied with care, on the dagger, the cloth, the shoe, the handkerchief. The thud Miss Clara heard at 10:15 was no accident, but the sound of Sir Reginald moving through the secret passage, perhaps to hide the manuscripts, or to meet someone. The singed letter, warning of danger, was his attempt to protect himself.
or to mislead us further. And the pearl, found in the ditch, points to a woman's presence, or an attempt to implicate one. He turned to Mr. Reed, whose face was ashen. Monsieur Reed, your confession was most illuminating. You saw a shadow in the study doorway, arguing with Sir Reginald just before the thud. You feared for your safety, but you did not tell all. The shadow was not alone, was it? Reed's hands trembled, and he shook his head. I only saw one figure, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I swear it. Sherlock Holmes's eyes narrowed. Yet the evidence suggests otherwise. The passage, the letters, the handkerchief, all point to a conspiracy. Let me reconstruct the events of that night. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Sir Reginald, aware of the threat, planned to hide the manuscripts. At 10 o'clock,
Someone followed him. Someone he trusted, or someone who knew his plan. An argument ensued, and the thud Miss Clara heard was the result. A struggle, perhaps, or an object falling as Sir Reginald fled. He turned to the guests, his voice rising with intensity. The shadow Mr. Reed saw was the betrayer. But who? Dr. Mortimer, whose ambition drove her to covet the manuscripts? Mr. Grayson, whose debts made him desperate for wealth? Mrs. Langley, whose resentment over Sir Reginald's refusal to fund her charity festered? Mr. Crane, whose silence conceals more than it reveals? Or Mr. Reed himself, whose access to the safe and nervous demeanor betray a guilty conscience? The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to one another. Miss Clara's voice broke the silence, trembling but resolute. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, please, where is my uncle? Is he alive? Sherlock Holmes's expression softened, but his tone remained firm. Mademoiselle, I believe your uncle is alive, hidden within this manor. The clues, the lack of a body, the staged blood, suggest he has not met a violent end. But he is in danger, and the key lies in the cipher. He produced the cryptic parchment from his pocket, its symbols stark against the worn paper. This cipher, inscribed with Veritas in Umbris, holds the secret to the Templar treasure. Sir Reginald hid it, but someone else sought it. That someone is among us. Dr. Mortimer stood, her voice sharp. This is preposterous. You accuse without proof, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I was in the drawing room, as I have said. The manuscripts were my interest, yes, but I would never harm Sir Reginald. Sherlock Holmes's gaze turned to her, piercing. Yet you omitted your absence by the conservatory door, Dr. Mortimer. A small detail, but significant. And you, Mr. Grayson, he continued, turning to the antiquarian. Your cigar break at 10:15 places you near the study. Convenient, none? Grayson's face reddened. I was smoking, nothing more. I heard no thud, saw no shadow. Sherlock Holmes moved to Mrs. Langley, whose hands shook. Madame, your financial dispute with Sir Reginald gave you motive. And your pearl, did it not fall in the ditch as you placed the shoe? Mrs. Langley gasped, a hand flying to her necklace, where a single pearl was missing. I lost that pearl days ago. I swear, I didn't go to the ditch. Sherlock Holmes's eyes flickered to Mr. Crane, who had remained silent. Monsieur Crane, your sketches are absent. Your alibi, unverified. Were you in the conservatory, or elsewhere, perhaps in the passage?
I heard Sir Reginald say, "You'll never have it." To whom, I don't know.
Sherlock Holmes nodded, his trap sprung. The truth emerges. The shadow was not one person, but two. Sir Reginald argued with his betrayer, and another witnessed it. The manuscripts are still in the manor, hidden in a place only Sir Reginald knew, and I know where." He strode to the fireplace, pressing a hidden panel in the mantel. A soft click sounded, and a small compartment opened, revealing a leather-bound book. Inside were the missing manuscripts, their pages marked with the same cryptic symbols. The room gasped, and Miss Clara cried out, "Uncle's manuscripts!" Sherlock Holmes held up the book, his voice triumphant. "Sir Reginald hid them here, knowing the passage was compromised. He is alive, hiding in the manor's east wing, in a room accessible only through the passage. And the betrayer—" He turned to Mr. Crane, whose face had gone pale. "Monsieur Crane, your silence speaks volumes. You were in the passage, weren't you? You argued with Sir Reginald, seeking the cipher for your own ends." Crane stood, his eyes blazing. "You have no proof. I was sketching, I told you." Sherlock Holmes smiled faintly. "Your sketch pad, monsieur, is blank, and your boots, mud from the ditch, despite your claim of staying indoors. You followed Sir Reginald, and when he refused to yield the cipher, you staged his disappearance, using blood from a cut of your own to mislead us." Crane lunged toward the door, but Sergeant Waller was faster, restraining him. The room erupted in chaos, but Sherlock Holmes' voice cut through. "The truth is revealed. Sir Reginald is safe, and the manuscripts are secure. The game is over." Chapter 11. The Reflection. The revelation of Mr. Victor Crane's guilt sent a shockwave through Ashbourne Manor, the air thick with the aftertaste of betrayal. The drawing room, moments ago a cauldron of tension, now buzzed with a mixture of relief and disbelief. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting long shadows across the faces of the guests, who sat stunned, their eyes fixed on Sherlock Holmes. The little Belgian detective stood serene, the leather-bound book of manuscripts in his hand, his demeanour one of quiet triumph. Captain Hastings, by the door, felt a surge of admiration for his friend, whose intellect had once again unravelled a seemingly impenetrable mystery. Sergeant Waller, his grip firm on Mr. Crane's arm, looked to Sherlock Holmes for instruction. The painter, his brooding facade shattered, struggled briefly but subsided under the constable's strength, his eyes burning with defiance. Miss Clara Ashbourne, tears streaming down her cheeks, rose and approached Sherlock Holmes, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, you found the manuscripts. But my uncle, where is he? Is he truly safe?" Sherlock Holmes' expression softened, his moustache twitching with a faint smile.
"Mademoiselle, your uncle is indeed alive, hidden in a secret room in the East Wing, accessible only through the passage we discovered. He staged his disappearance to protect the manuscripts, fearing betrayal, but he did not anticipate Mr. Crane's treachery. Come, we shall find him now." Leaving Sergeant Waller to guard Crane, Sherlock Holmes led Hastings, Miss Clara, and a reluctant but curious Dr. Evelyn Mortimer to the study. The other guests, Mr. Grayson, Mrs. Langley, and Mr. Reed, remained in the drawing room, their relief tempered by the lingering weight of their own secrets. The mist outside had thickened, cloaking the manor in an ethereal haze, as if the estate itself exhaled in relief at the nearing resolution. In the study, Sherlock Holmes moved to the bookcase, his fingers deftly activating the hidden lever. The panels swung open, revealing the narrow passage, its walls damp and shadowed. With a lantern in hand, he led the way, his steps sure despite the cramped confines. Hastings followed, his heart pounding with anticipation, while Miss Clara clutched his arm, her breath uneven. Dr. Mortimer, her scholarly curiosity overriding her skepticism, brought up the rear, her spectacles glinting in the dim light. The passage twisted through the manor's foundations, descending to the cellar where Sherlock Holmes had found the crate of letters. But he pressed on, following a faint seam in the stone wall that others might have overlooked. With a gentle push, a hidden door creaked open, revealing a small, windowless room, its air heavy with the scent of dust and old paper. There, seated at a makeshift desk, was Sir Reginald Ashbourne, his face haggard but alive, a lantern casting a soft glow over his trembling hands. "Uncle!"
Miss Clara cried, rushing to his side. She threw her arms around him, tears of relief streaming down her face. Sir Reginald, his eyes wide with surprise, embraced her tightly, his voice hoarse. "Clara, my dear, I thought I'd lost you." Sherlock Holmes, standing back, observed the reunion with a quiet satisfaction. "Monsieur Ashburn, your plan was ingenious, but perilous. You staged your disappearance to protect the cipher, but you underestimated your betrayer." Sir Reginald nodded, his expression weary. "I received a letter, a threat, warning me that the manuscripts were known to others. I feared for their safety, and for Clara's. I hid them in the fireplace compartment, and retreated here, using the passage to avoid detection. I thought I could wait out the danger." Dr. Mortimer, her voice sharp with curiosity, interjected. "The cipher, Sir Reginald, what is it? Is it truly the key to a Templar treasure?" Sir Reginald's eyes flickered with a mix of pride and caution. "It is a map, hidden in the symbols, a guide to a vault in France, where the—"
Holmes nodded, his mind already reconstructing the events. "And Mr. Crane, aware of your discovery, sought to steal it. He followed you into the passage, argued with you, and when you refused to yield, he staged the blood-stained clues to suggest murder, hoping to throw suspicion onto others while he searched for the manuscripts." Sir Reginald's face darkened. "Crane, he was a guest, an artist. I never suspected him. But that night, I heard him in the passage searching. I hid here, fearing he would find me." Hastings, his curiosity unsatisfied, asked, "But the blood, Sherlock Holmes, whose was it?" Sherlock Holmes's eyes twinkled. "A simple deception, Hastings. Crane cut his own hand, likely with the dagger, to provide the blood. The small quantity, the careful placement, it was all part of his charade to mislead us. The pearl, I suspect, was an accident, dropped in his haste to plant the shoe in the ditch." Returning to the drawing room, Sherlock Holmes confronted Crane, who sat under Sergeant Waller's watchful eye. The painter's defiance had faded, replaced by a sullen resignation. "You have no proof," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Sherlock Holmes held up the manuscripts, their weight a silent accusation. "The manuscripts are found, Monsieur Crane, and Sir Reginald is safe. Your mud-stained boots, your blank sketchpad, your presence in the passage, all betray you. And the pearl, dropped in the ditch, matches the one missing from Mrs. Langley's necklace, which you borrowed to cast suspicion on her." Mrs. Langley gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "My pearl! I thought I'd lost it." Crane's shoulders slumped, and he said no more, his silence an admission of guilt. Sergeant Waller, with a nod from Sherlock Holmes, prepared to escort him to the village for questioning, the weight of justice settling over the room. As the guests absorbed the resolution, Sherlock Holmes turned to them, his voice reflective. "Mesdames et messieurs, this case reminds us that the human heart is a complex thing. Greed, fear, ambition, they drive us to acts of great cunning, but also to great folly. Sir Reginald sought to protect his legacy, but in doing so he invited danger. Mr. Crane sought wealth, but found only ruin. Let this be a lesson. The truth, though hidden in shadows, will always emerge." Miss Clara, still holding her uncle's arm, looked to Sherlock Holmes with gratitude. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, how can we thank you? You've saved my uncle, preserved his work." Sherlock Holmes bowed slightly, his eyes twinkling. "Mademoiselle, the thanks of the little grey cells is to see order restored. I require no more." As the guests dispersed, Sir Reginald to recover, Crane to face justice, and the others to grapple
Chase. Hastings smiled, accustomed to his friend's philosophy. "And you'll be ready for it, Sherlock Holmes." With a final glance at the manor, Sherlock Holmes stepped into the mist,
his figure fading into the gray, leaving behind a legacy of logic and triumph. The mist that cloaked Ashbourne Manor seemed to linger, as if reluctant to release the estate from its grip of secrets. The revelation of Mr. Victor Crane's treachery and the safe return of Sir Reginald Ashbourne had brought a measure of relief to the household. Yet an undercurrent of unease persisted. The guests, though freed from the immediate shadow of suspicion, remained wary, their trust in one another fractured by the events of the past days. The rain had ceased, leaving the air damp and heavy, and the manor's ancient walls seemed to hum with the echoes of the drama that had unfolded. Sherlock Holmes, his work seemingly complete, stood in the library, his small, neat figure silhouetted against the tall windows. The leather-bound book of manuscripts, now safely returned to Sir Reginald, rested on the table, its cryptic symbols a silent testament to the mystery's heart. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, sensed that his friend was not entirely satisfied despite the resolution. There was a restlessness in Sherlock Holmes's eyes, a flicker of curiosity that suggested the case was not yet fully closed. "Hastings, mon ami," Sherlock Holmes said, his voice low and thoughtful. "The truth has been revealed, yet there are threads that remain untied. The cipher, the manuscripts, the motives of our guests, these are clear. But there is a shadow behind the shadow, a deeper motive we have not yet uncovered." Hastings, his brow furrowed, glanced at the manuscripts. "But Sherlock Holmes, you found Sir Reginald, exposed Crane, and recovered the manuscripts. What more could there be?" Sherlock Holmes's mustache twitched, a sign of his amusement at Hastings' earnestness. "The human heart, Hastings, is never so simple. Crane acted out of greed, yes, but his knowledge of the passage, his precise staging of the clues, these suggest a confederate, someone who guided him or used him. We must look closer." The morning was spent in quiet consultation with Sir Reginald, who, though weakened by his ordeal, was eager to assist. Seated in the library, his face still pale, he recounted the events leading to his disappearance with greater detail. "The anonymous letter," he said, his voice hoarse, "arrived a week ago, slipped under my study door. It warned that the manuscripts were known to others, that I was watched. I suspected one of my guests, but I could not be sure. I hid the manuscripts in the fireplace compartment and retreated to the secret room, hoping to outwait the danger." Sherlock Holmes listened intently, his fingers steepled. "And the letter, Monsieur Ashbourne?"
Shook his head. "It was printed, not written, as if to conceal the author's identity. I burned it, fearing it would fall into the wrong hands, but I knew someone close to me was involved, someone who knew of the passage." Miss Clara, who had joined them, her face etched with concern, added, "Uncle was secretive, even with me. He mentioned the passage only once, years ago, as a curiosity of the manor. I never thought it would come to this." Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The passage is key, mademoiselle. Only someone with intimate knowledge of the manor could have used it, and Mr. Crane, though cunning, was not a man of such knowledge. He was a tool, I think, of another's design." To test his theory, Sherlock Holmes proposed a final gathering of the guests, a chance to observe their reactions now that the primary culprit had been apprehended. The drawing room, with its familiar grandeur, was once again the stage, the fire casting a warm glow over the tense assembly. Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, her scholarly pride restored but tempered, sat with a guarded expression. Mr. Lionel Grayson, his debt still a shadow over his joviality, fidgeted nervously. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her composure fragile, clutched her ever-present handkerchief. Mr. Thomas Reed, though cleared of direct involvement, remained pale,
his eyes avoiding Sherlock Holmes's gaze. Mesdames et messieurs, Sherlock Holmes began, standing before the fireplace. The case of Sir Reginald's disappearance has been resolved, yet one question lingers. Who sent the anonymous letter that set this drama in motion? Mr. Crane staged the clues, but he did not act alone. Someone in this house provided him with knowledge of the passage, perhaps hoping to profit from the chaos. Dr. Mortimer's lips tightened. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, you suggest a conspiracy, but Crane confessed. Why drag this out? Sherlock Holmes's smile was faint but piercing. Because, Dr. Mortimer, the truth is not complete. The letter was printed. A deliberate choice to conceal identity. But the passage, only someone with access to Sir Reginald's confidences could know of it. And you, madame, have studied the manor's history, have you not? Dr. Mortimer's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. I am a scholar, yes, but I knew nothing of the passage. Sir Reginald was secretive, even with colleagues. Sherlock Holmes turned to Mr. Reed, whose hands shook. And you, Monsieur Reed, as Sir Reginald's solicitor, had access to his papers, perhaps even his architectural plans. Did you share such knowledge with Mr. Crane? Reed's
Mr. Crane, in passing, during a conversation about the manor's history, I never thought he would use it. The room gasped, and Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed with triumph. Madame Langley, your candor is revealing. You did not intend harm, perhaps, but your words set the stage for Crane's plan. The letter, I suspect, was your doing as well, a warning to Sir Reginald, hoping to protect him, but also to unsettle him. Mrs. Langley's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. I only wanted him to be cautious. I was angry about the funding, yes, but I cared for him. I sent the letter anonymously, thinking it would make him guard the manuscripts more closely. I never imagined it would lead to this. Sherlock Holmes nodded, his expression softening. Your intentions were misguided, madame, but not malicious. Crane used your knowledge and your letter to orchestrate his scheme, hoping to steal the manuscripts while casting suspicion on others. Grayson, his voice hoarse, spoke up. So, Crane acted alone, but Mrs. Langley's mistake gave him the means? Precisement, Sherlock Holmes replied. The conspiracy was not one of equals, but of opportunity. Mrs. Langley provided the spark, and Crane fanned the flame. The truth, as always, lies in the details. As the guests absorbed this final twist, Sir Reginald, supported by Miss Clara, entered the room. His presence silenced the murmurs, his weary but resolute gaze sweeping over the assembly. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, he said, his voice steady despite his fatigue. Your logic has saved my work and my life. The manuscripts will be shared with the scholarly world as I intended, but with greater care. I thank you. Sherlock Holmes bowed slightly, his eyes twinkling. Monsieur, the little grey cells require no thanks, only the satisfaction of truth. But beware, secrets once uncovered invite new dangers. Guard your cipher well. As the guests dispersed, their relief palpable, but tempered by the weight of their own roles in the drama,
Sherlock Holmes turned to Hastings. Mon ami, the case is truly closed now. The echoes of truth have sounded, and the manor is at peace. But the world, it is full of such puzzles, waiting for us. Hastings smiled, his admiration undimmed. And you'll solve them all, Sherlock Holmes. With a final glance,
If the manor's war still held secrets waiting to be uncovered.
Sherlock Holmes, ever vigilant, sensed that the case, though seemingly closed, harbored one final layer of truth, a motive deeper than greed that had yet to be fully illuminated. Captain Hastings, standing by the library window, watched the guests gather for morning tea in the drawing room, their voices subdued, but their glances sharp. Sir Reginald, though weakened, had joined them, his presence a reassurance that the manor's heart still beat. Miss Clara Ashbourne hovered at his side, her devotion unwavering, while Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, Mr. Lionel Grayson, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, and Mr. Thomas Reed maintained a polite distance, their roles in the drama still fresh in their minds. Mr. Crane, now in the custody of Sergeant Waller in the village, was a spectre that loomed over the gathering, his betrayal a wound not yet healed. Sherlock Holmes, seated at the library table, reviewed his notes with meticulous care. The cryptic manuscripts, the singed letter, and the blood-stained handkerchief arranged before him like pieces of a chessboard. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, betrayed a mind still at work, probing for the final piece of the puzzle. Hastings, sensing his friend's restlessness, approached, his voice low. Sherlock Holmes, you found Sir Reginald, recovered the manuscripts, and exposed Crane and Mrs. Langley's part in the affair. What more is there to uncover? Sherlock Holmes's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Mon ami, you are ever impatient. The case is resolved, yes, but the motive? Why did Crane act with such precision? And why did Mrs. Langley, a woman of good intentions, risk such a dangerous deception? There is a hidden thread, a personal connection that binds this drama together. We must tug at it gently. To that end, Sherlock Holmes requested a private audience with Sir Reginald and Miss Clara in the study, where the air still carried the faint scent of old parchment and wax. The blood-stained dagger, now safely stored, no longer loomed over the desk, but the memory of its discovery lingered. Sir Reginald, seated in a high-backed chair, looked frailer than before, his eyes shadowed by the ordeal. Miss Clara stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her expression a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Monsieur Ashbourne, Sherlock Holmes began, his tone gentle but probing, you have been most forthcoming, but there is one matter we have not fully explored. The anonymous letter that drove you to stage your disappearance. Who did you suspect as its author, beyond Mrs. Langley's confession? And why did Mr. Crane, an artist with no apparent connection to your work, pursue the manuscripts with such fervor? Sir Reginald's hands trembled slightly, and he glanced at Miss Clara before answering. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I suspected one of my guests, but I could not be certain. The letter was
Printed, as I said, and I thought it might be Dr. Mortimer with her ambition, or even Grayson, whose debts were no secret. As for Crane, I knew him only as a guest invited at Clara's suggestion. He seemed a quiet man, an artist, not a thief. Miss Clara's face paled, and she spoke softly. I invited Mr. Crane, it's true. He was a friend of a friend, recommended for his knowledge of medieval art. I thought he would appreciate Uncle's work. I never imagined. Sherlock Holmes's eyes narrowed, his mind seizing on the detail. Mademoiselle, this friend, who recommended Mr. Crane? Miss Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on her uncle's shoulder. It was Mrs. Langley. She said she knew him through her charitable work, that he was a talented artist in need of patronage. Sherlock Holmes's expression grew grave, and he rose, pacing slowly. Mrs. Langley again. Her role in this affair is more complex than I first thought. She sent the anonymous letter, yes, but her connection to Crane suggests a deeper involvement. We must speak with her at once. Mrs. Langley was summoned to the study,
her elegant figure now marked by a visible strain. Her eyes, red-rimmed from sleeplessness, met Sherlock Holmes's with a mixture of defiance and resignation. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," she said, her voice steady despite her evident emotion, "I've told you everything. I sent the letter to warn Sir Reginald, and I mentioned the passage to Crane in passing. What more do you want from me?" Sherlock Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "Madame, you recommended Mr. Crane to Miss Clara, knowing his interest in medieval art. But was there more to your connection? Did you know of his ambitions, his desperation, perhaps a debt he owed you?" Mrs. Langley's hands shook, and she sank into a chair, her composure crumbling. I didn't know he would go so far. Victor, Mr. Crane, was a struggling artist, yes, but he was also my cousin's son, fallen on hard times. I thought inviting him here would give him a chance to network, to find patrons. I told him about the manuscripts, thinking he might sketch them for his portfolio. I never imagined he would try to steal them. The revelation sent a ripple through the room. Sir Reginald's eyes widened, and Miss Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Hastings, ever the observer, scribbled furiously in his notebook, his admiration for Sherlock Holmes's insight growing by the moment. Sherlock Holmes nodded, his expression one of quiet triumph. "So, Madame, your familial tie to Crane explains his presence, and your knowledge of the passage gave him the means. But the letter, why send it, knowing it would provoke Sir Reginald?" Mrs. Langley's voice broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was angry with Reginald for withdrawing his funding, yes, but I cared for him. I heard rumors, whispers among scholars, that the letter to scare him into protecting the manuscripts, not to drive him into hiding. When I told Victor about the passage, I thought it was harmless gossip. I never meant for this." Sherlock Holmes's eyes softened, though his tone remained firm. "Madame, your intentions were flawed, but your confession completes the picture. Crane, driven by greed and opportunity, used your information to pursue the manuscripts, staging the disappearance to cover his theft. The blood, the clues, all were his attempt to shift blame, perhaps to you, with the pearl he took from your necklace." Mrs. Langley sobbed, her handkerchief pressed to her face. "I am so sorry, Reginald. Clara, I never meant to cause such harm." Sir Reginald, his face etched with compassion, reached out to her. "Beatrice, your mistake was grave, but your heart was not malicious. We shall move forward together." Sherlock Holmes turned to Hastings, his voice low. "Mon ami, the hidden motive is revealed. Mrs. Langley's familial tie and misguided actions set the stage, but Crane's greed was the true catalyst. The case is truly closed now." As Mrs. Langley was escorted back to the drawing room, Sherlock Holmes lingered in the study, his gaze fixed on the manuscripts. "The human heart, Hastings, is a labyrinth. Greed, loyalty, fear, they intertwine, leading to chaos, but order, always, can be restored." Hastings smiled, his faith in his friend unshaken. "You've done it again, Sherlock Holmes. The manor is at peace." Sherlock Holmes's eyes twinkled. "For now, mon ami, but the world is full of labyrinths, and the little grey cells are ever ready." Chapter 14. The Final Threads. The pale light of late morning filtered through the high windows of Ashbourne Manor, casting a soft glow over the library, where Sherlock Holmes stood. His small, precise figure, a beacon of calm, amidst the lingering echoes of the case. The revelation of Mrs. Beatrice Langley's unwitting role in Mr. Victor Crane's scheme had tied up many of the mystery's threads, yet the manor's atmosphere remained heavy, as if the weight of secrets had not fully lifted. The guests, though relieved by Sir Reginald Ashbourne's safe return and the recovery of the manuscripts, moved with a cautious deference, their interactions marked by a newfound humility. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful chronicler, stood by the library's fireplace, his notebook open but untouched, his mind still reeling from the complexities of the case. Sir Reginald, seated at the desk, leafed through the recovered manuscripts,
his face a mixture of relief and determination. Miss Clara Ashbourne, her composure restored, sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. The other guests, Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, Mr. Lionel Grayson, and Mr. Thomas Reed, had retreated to the drawing room, their roles in the drama now clarified, though not without consequence. Mrs. Langley, shaken by her confession, had chosen in her room. Her part in the affair, a burden she would carry for some time.
Sherlock Holmes, his eyes fixed on the cryptic parchment with its inscription, Veritas in Umbris, spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of reflection. Mon ami Hastings, the case of the vanishing historian is a study in human frailty. Greed, as embodied by Monsieur Crane, drove the central act. But it was Madame Langley's misplaced loyalty and fear that set the stage. Each guest in their way contributed to the tapestry, ambition, debt, resentment, all woven together by the lure of a Templar treasure. Hastings nodded, his admiration for his friend undimmed. But Sherlock Holmes, how did you know Mrs. Langley was connected to Crane? Her confession came so suddenly. Sherlock Holmes's moustache twitched, a faint smile betraying his satisfaction. The pearl, Hastings. It was the key. When I found it in the ditch, I noted its match to Madame Langley's necklace, yet her denial of being there was genuine. Only someone close to her could have taken it. Someone like Crane, her cousin's son, who used it to cast suspicion. Her mention of the passage to him, though innocent, was the spark that ignited his plan. The anonymous letter, her final admission, confirmed her role as an unwitting catalyst. Sir Reginald looked up from the manuscripts, his voice steady but tinged with regret. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I owe you my life and my work. I was a fool to think I could outwit my enemies alone. The cipher, this map to a Templar vault, drew danger I did not foresee. I should have trusted Clara, or even you from the start. Miss Clara's eyes softened, and she squeezed her uncle's hand. Uncle, you acted to protect your legacy. Mr. Sherlock Holmes has shown us the truth, and we can move forward now. Sherlock Holmes inclined his head, his expression one of quiet humility. Mademoiselle, monsieur, the truth is my only reward. But let us examine the cipher one last time. Its secrets may yet guide us to a final clarity. He spread the parchment on the desk, its grid of lines and dots a puzzle that had driven the entire affair. With Sir Reginald's assistance, Sherlock Holmes traced the symbols, cross-referencing them with notes from the manuscripts. The cipher, he explained, is a substitution code layered with geometric patterns. It points to a location, a church in Provence, where the Templars hid their wealth. But there is more. A secondary inscription, hidden in the margins, suggests a guardian, a figure entrusted with protecting the secret. Sir Reginald's eyes widened. A guardian? I had not seen that. But who could it be? Sherlock Holmes's gaze grew distant.
Hastings, ever curious, interjected. But if Crane was the thief, and Mrs. Langley the unwitting accomplice, who else could know of this guardian? Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. That, Hastings, is the final thread. I suspect the guardian is closer than we think. Perhaps within this very house. Monsieur Reed, for instance, knew of the safe's contents and Sir Reginald's fears. His nervousness, though not guilt, suggests he holds a piece of the puzzle. To test this theory, Sherlock Holmes summoned Mr. Reed to the library. The solicitor entered, his face pale, his hands fidgeting with his cufflinks. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he stammered, "I've told you everything. I saw the shadow, heard the argument, but I swear I had no part in Crane's scheme."
Sherlock Holmes's voice was gentle but probing. "Monsieur Reed, you are a man of loyalty, yet your fear betrays you. Did Sir Reginald ever speak of a guardian? Someone entrusted with the cipher's secret?" Reed hesitated, his eyes darting to Sir Reginald. He mentioned something once, in passing, a family tradition, he called it, a duty to protect the cipher passed down through the Ashbourne line. I thought it was fanciful, a scholar's fancy. But he said Clara was to be told when the time was right. Miss Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Me? Uncle, is this true?" Sir Reginald nodded slowly, his expression one of revelation. "It is, Clara. I meant to tell you when you were older, when the manuscripts were secure. The Ashbournes have guarded the Templar secret for generations. You are the next in line." Sherlock Holmes's smile was one of quiet triumph. And so, the final thread is tied. The cipher's guardian is Mademoiselle Clara, and the letter was sent to disrupt this legacy. Crane, guided by Madame Langley's careless words, sought to seize it for himself. But the truth, as always, prevails. As Reed retreated, visibly relieved, Sherlock Holmes turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, the case is complete. The manuscripts are safe, the guardian is revealed, and the manor is at peace. But the cipher's secret, the vault in Provence, must be guarded with care." Sir Reginald, his strength returning, stood and clasped Sherlock Holmes's hand. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, your genius has preserved my family's legacy. The manuscripts will be shared with the world, but the cipher's secret will remain with Clara under lock and key." Sherlock Holmes bowed slightly, his eyes twinkling. "Monsieur, the little grey cells require no more Hastings. But the world is never short of mysteries, and we shall be ready." Chapter 15. The Departure. The morning sun broke through the last vestiges of mist, bathing Ashbourne Manor in a golden light that seemed to cleanse the estate of its recent shadows. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and autumn leaves, and the Berkshire hills stood sentinel in the distance, their colours vibrant against the clearing sky. Inside, the manor hummed with a quiet restoration of order, the guests preparing to depart, their roles in the drama of Sir Reginald Ashbourne's disappearance now fully illuminated. The weight of secrets had lifted, replaced by a tentative peace, though the echoes of the case lingered in the minds of all. Sherlock Holmes, his work complete, stood in the grand hall, his small, immaculate figure a study in serene confidence. His perfectly tailored coat and polished shoes gleamed in the morning light, and his moustache was waxed to perfection, a testament to his unyielding precision even in the aftermath of a case. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood beside him, his suitcase packed, his notebook filled with the details of their latest triumph. The manuscripts, safely returned to Sir Reginald, rested in a locked case in the study, their cryptic cipher now entrusted to Miss Clara Ashbourne, the newly revealed guardian of the Templar secret. Sir Reginald, his strength slowly returning, joined them in the hall, his face etched with gratitude and resolve. Miss Clara stood at his side, her auburn hair catching the light, her expression one of quiet determination. The other guests, Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, Mr. Lionel Grayson, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, and Mr. Thomas Reed, gathered nearby, their farewells marked by a mixture of relief and introspection. Mr. Victor Crane, now in the hands of the authorities in the village, was a spectre no longer present but keenly felt, his betrayal a cautionary tale for all. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," Sir Reginald said,
his voice steady despite his recent ordeal. "You have not only saved my life and my work, but restored my faith in justice. The manuscripts will be shared with the scholarly world, but the cipher's secret, the map to the Templar vault, will remain with Clara, guarded with the utmost care. How can I ever repay you?" Sherlock Holmes bowed slightly, his eyes twinkling with a rare warmth. "Monsieur Ashbourne, the thanks of the little grey cells is to see order restored where chaos reigned. Your legacy is secure, and that is reward enough. But I urge you and Mademoiselle Clara to be vigilant. Secrets, even well guarded, attract those who seek power." Miss Clara stepped forward, her voice soft but resolute. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I will honor my duty as guardian. The cipher will remain safe."
Mademoiselle, your courage and clarity do you credit. Trust your instincts, but always verify. The human heart is a labyrinth, and even the best intentions can lead astray. Dr. Mortimer, her scholarly pride tempered by the case's revelations, approached with a nod. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I underestimated you. Your logic is as formidable as any manuscript I've studied. I shall return to my work with a new perspective." Mr. Grayson, his debts still a shadow but his spirit lighter, offered a hearty handshake. "You've saved us all from suspicion, Sherlock Holmes. I'll be more cautious about my company in the future." Mrs. Langley, her eyes still red from the weight of her confession, spoke softly. "I shall carry the guilt of my mistake, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, but your compassion has given me hope. I will make amends, starting with my charity work." Mr. Reed, his nervousness abated but his demeanor subdued, added, "You've shown me the value of honesty, sir. I'll never again hold back what I know, no matter the fear." Sherlock Holmes listened to each with his characteristic calm, his mind already turning to the next challenge, though his presence remained fully in the moment. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, addressing the group, "this case has shown us the fragility of trust and the power of truth. Each of you played a part, wittingly or not, in the drama of Sir Reginald's disappearance. Let it be a lesson. The smallest action, a word, a glance, a letter, can set great events in motion. Guard your secrets, but above all, guard your integrity." With farewells exchanged, the guests began to depart, their carriages rattling down the drive, leaving the manor quieter than it had been in days. Sergeant Waller, who had returned to oversee the final arrangements, tipped his helmet to Sherlock Holmes. "You're a marvel, sir. The village will talk of this for years." Sherlock Holmes smiled faintly. "Let them talk, Sergeant. The truth needs no audience, only the light of day." As the hall emptied, Sherlock Holmes turned to Hastings, his suitcase in hand. "Mon ami, the manor is at peace, and our work here is done. But the world is full of mysteries, and we must be ready for the next." Hastings, his admiration for his friend unshaken, grinned. "Where to next, Sherlock Holmes? Another manor, another puzzle?" Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Perhaps, Hastings. Or perhaps a train, a city, or a quiet village hiding its own secrets. The little gray cells, they are never idle." They stepped out into the crisp morning, the manor's ivy-clad walls glowing in the sunlight. The carriage awaited, its driver ready to take them to the station. As they climbed aboard, Sherlock Holmes cast a final glance at Ashbourne Manor,
The manor fading into the distance, a monument to a mystery solved. Hastings, settling back, felt a familiar thrill, the promise of the next adventure, wherever it might lead. And with Sherlock Holmes at his side, he knew the truth would always find its way.